Hey, Dr. Wilson here. I'm a molecular and structural biologist, and I'm back to debunk some more anti-vaccine misinformation. And in this video, I'm going to be debunking the kingpin of anti-vaccine campaigns himself, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Excuse my voice. I got a disease called spasmodic dystonia, and it makes my voice tremble, particularly when I first start talking.
RFK Jr. is one of the most prolific and biggest funders of anti-vaccine misinformation ever. Here I'm going to fact check the claims that RFK Jr. says the most often and show you exactly what the real science says about these topics that he feels so adamantly about. He really believes he has the science on his side and that he's doing the right thing, but he doesn't, and he's not.
I'm very accustomed to reading science. As part of my job,
Right.
I've brought hundreds of lawsuits. They all involve scientific controversy.
Well, as we're going to see in this video, Robert is not very good at reading science, at least not correctly.
First of all, you started out by introducing me as anti-vaccine, which I'm not. And I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm not anti-vaccine. And they called me anti-vax because of a way of discrediting me and marginalizing me and shutting. But I've never said anything to anybody to make anybody think I'm anti-vax.
Well, Robert, in my book, an anti-vaxxer is somebody who denies the science of vaccines.
I just want safe vaccines. I want vaccines tested. I believe we should have safe vaccines, and I believe we should have robust science.
You cannot make a vaccine safely.
That's why you can come up here and say I'm anti-vaccine. I'm for vaccines, but I'm for safe vaccines.
Robert, you are anti-vaccine because you are denying the science that tells you that safe vaccines exist and have existed for a very long time. And if I'm wrong on this and you truly are for safe vaccines, then please define what you mean by a safe vaccine.
A safe vaccine is a vaccine that has been tested against a placebo.
They're not using placebo testing. If you don't test against placebo, you don't know whether the people who became ill in that cohort that received the vaccine became ill because of the vaccine or is just coincidental.
Test them against an inert placebo. Not one of them has ever been.
Every vaccine that has been approved for commercial use is tested against a placebo. We saw this just recently with the COVID-19 vaccines, which were tested against tens of thousands of people over multiple phases of clinical trials and against a saline placebo.
Vaccine should be tested.
And they don't have to test vaccines. It's the only medical product that doesn't have to be safety tested.
Vaccines are never safety tested.
If they work, let's show that they work in an authentic safety test.
There are several studies for every single vaccine that is on the market right now and part of the vaccine schedule, showing that they have been extensively tested for safety and efficacy before they were approved for use, and that they continue to be monitored for safety and improved upon.
Test them against an unvaccinated population. So show me a vaccinated population and an unvaccinated population, and show me that the vaccinated population is healthier.
It's easy to see that vaccinated populations are healthier than unvaccinated populations. You see, vaccines prevent disease, and in unvaccinated populations, you can find these vaccine-preventable diseases at much higher rates than in vaccinated populations. In fact, vaccines have saved millions of lives just in the past few decades. You don't get much more unhealthy than dead.
But there is, Robert, a huge body of science that doesn't support your position.
Show it to me.
Okay, well,
Show it to me. Show me one study.
I'll show you a lot of studies, but right now,
study,
Well, maybe he just missed all those studies.
and if you show me that study, Andy, I will quit my job at the CHD. I will post that study on my website. I will post that study on our website, and I will leave. And I will retire from this work and go back to working for a waterkeeper full-time.
So, despite the fact that there are mountains of scientific evidence, several scientific studies performed all over the world over several decades, showing that vaccines are in fact safe and effective for public use, he denies all of that. Not only have vaccines saved millions of lives, but just in the year 2017, worldwide, an estimated 1.5 million people have died from vaccine-preventable diseases. So, Robert, I would hope that you dedicate your time and resources to making sure that these children, who I'm sure you genuinely care about, don't suffer from vaccine-preventable diseases, instead of telling populations like us who are spoiled by vaccines that they are dangerous.
If you were born prior to 1989, which is the year they changed the vaccine schedule, you have a 12% chance of having a chronic disease. If you were born after 1989, you have a 54% chance. It's 54%.
Wow.
Nobody's explaining, why do all our kids have diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis?
ADD, ADHD, speech delay, tics, narcolepsy, language delay, SIDS.
Yes, the prevalence of chronic conditions has increased over time. However, there is absolutely no evidence that this is because of vaccines.
All those 400 diseases that suddenly became epidemic after 1989, there's about 300 diseases.
Those diseases that are now epidemic, those 420 diseases,
Every one of them is listed as a side effect on the manufacturer's inserts.
they appear on two lists. One is a list of diseases that have become epidemic since 1989, and two, they are on the manufacturer's inserts listed as side effects from vaccination. And
No, not every chronic condition that has become more prevalent over the years is listed as a side effect for vaccines. You can always read the vaccine insert to check this for yourself.
Why did food allergies suddenly appear in 1989?
Food allergies didn't suddenly appear in 1989. There are medical records of food allergies being present as far back as the 1500s. Where does he get this stuff?
where's the autism coming from?
Why did autism drop from 1 in 10,000 in Europe, my generation, to 1 in 34 in the vaccine generation?
Because we understand autism a lot better now than we used to. We now know that autism is a spectrum where people with autism can be perfectly functioning, beautiful members of society and just be a little bit different.
The Institute of Medicine, which is the National Academy of Science, which is the ultimate arbiter of vaccine safety science, has repeatedly said to CDC, you are claiming that you have studied this issue, particularly the issue between autism and vaccines. You have not. So it's not Robert Kennedy. It's the Institute of Medicine, which is the highest authority, scientific authority in our government,
Right.
has repeatedly said to CDC, you have not done the studies necessary to make these claims that you are making.
First of all, I cannot believe that in 2021, a huge anti-vaxxer like RFK Jr. is still claiming that vaccines cause autism. There have been several massive studies asking the specific question, do vaccines cause autism? And all of them have found the answer to be no, that autism is not associated with vaccines at all. With somebody who claims to be so into the science and have the science so on his side, it is really weird that RFK Jr. is flat out ignoring these studies. In fact, what the National Academy of Sciences actually says on this topic is that there is no evidence to suggest that childhood immunization schedules are linked to autoimmune diseases, asthma, hypersensitivity, seizures or epilepsy, child developmental disorders, learning disorders or developmental disorders, or attention deficit disruptive behavior disorders. Again, that's the National Academy of Sciences, somebody that RFK Jr. cites directly as saying something that they never said, and they are an independent organization of scientists. They are not funded by Big Pharma, none of that.
I had 3 vaccines as a kid. Today's kids get 72.
So we went from the 3 vaccines that I had when I was a kid to 72 doses of vaccines that my children's generation is getting.
No, we don't have 72 vaccines that we give to children. We have 13 vaccines that we give in multiple doses, but that number still doesn't add up to 72. You see, by age 2, most children will have received 28 doses of vaccines, including their annual flu shot. By age 5, that number will rise to 35, and by age 18, that number rises to 54, again, including your annual flu shot. The only way you can get this 72 number is if you count combined vaccines as individual vaccines. For example, the MMR vaccine protects you against measles, mumps, and rubella. It's all one shot that is given in a couple of doses. But if you count the measles, mumps, and rubella all as individual vaccines, then you could get the number of 72, but that's not an accurate reflection of reality because, again, it's all one vaccine. Is it misleading and fear-mongering to say that one single shot, which vaccinates you against 3 different pathogens, is actually 3 different shots? It sounds fishy to me, but I'll let you decide on that one.
So Congress passed a law in 1986 that said no matter how negligent that company is, no matter how malicious they are, no matter how toxic the product, no matter how grievous your injury, you cannot sue them. And they were made profitable in 1986 when Congress passed a law that said you can't sue a vaccine company. So no matter how toxic the ingredient, no matter how negligent the company, no matter how grievous your injury, you can't sue them, which means that company has no incentive to make them safer.
Okay, so this is something I hear anti-vaxxers bring up all the time, this topic of vaccine courts. But in order to understand it, you have to understand the history. You see, in the 70s and 80s, there were several parents who believed that their child's brain injuries were due to the DTaP vaccine, or the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine. Further research was able to confirm that this link was non-existent. The vaccine had nothing to do with these brain injuries, but parents really believed that it did, and so they were suing a lot of pharmaceutical companies. Well, vaccines don't really offer much of a profit margin for pharmaceutical companies, so they said, okay, if we're going to have to deal with all these lawsuits, then we're just going to stop making this vaccine. Now, that would have been a problem because, again, the brain injuries were not linked to the vaccine, but the vaccine was saving so many lives. So the government stepped in, and by putting a tax on all vaccines, they were able to establish the vaccine courts. Now, the vaccine courts is not a scientific system. That means the verdicts are not always scientific. And the vaccine courts actually go out of their way to compensate those who file claims, even if the claim is rejected. Now, mind you that most of these compensations are due to things like shoulder injuries or fainting after receiving a vaccine. The serious adverse events that anti-vaxxers would like to scare you with are really rare. But since anti-vaxxers are often really hung up on vaccine courts, I'll still pull some numbers from it and demonstrate that vaccines are safe. So if you take all the doses of vaccines that were given between 2006 and 2018 and divide it between the all-time compensations from 1988 to 2020 given by the vaccine courts, that means that vaccines have an adverse event rate of 0.00019%. Well, that has been a list of the most common things that RFK Jr. says in almost every single interview he's ever given. It's the same stuff that he's been saying for years, and it's all easily proven false with just the most basic follow-up on his claims. Vaccines are such an important part of our health. We are absolutely spoiled by them. All you have to do to realize this is look at populations where vaccination rates are really low. In these parts of the world, vaccine-preventable diseases still kill over 1.5 million people every single year. And they're dying from diseases that countries like the USA have not really known for over a generation now. The truth is that vaccines save lives. Millions of lives have been saved by vaccines in the past few decades alone. And there is still so much more good that vaccines have the potential to do if the rest of the world could just have access to the same privileges that we have. So not only is RFK Jr. denying the science that is right in front of him, that he claims doesn't exist, but he is fighting for a reversal in public health. Something that has been built for decades to the point where we can't even remember the horrible diseases that we no longer have to worry about. I can hope that he'll be a man of his word and post the studies that I have listed here on his website and quit his job. But I don't think that he'll actually do that. So instead, I want to give something to the people who have been victimized by the anti-vaccine movement, and that is people with autism. If you look below this video, you'll find a link to donate to the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. It is a nonprofit advocacy group run by autistic people. And I just really think that they deserve more attention because it's people like anti-vaxxers, but not just anti-vaxxers, who constantly underestimate people with autism and treat them as if they are some burden on society that it's just disgusting. So please, if you have the money and the time, consider donating. I know that I will be donating all of the ad revenue that I make from this video to the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. That's going to do it for this week's video. I was really excited about it, so I hope you really enjoyed it too and found it really informative. I don't think RFK Jr. is going anywhere anytime soon. So if you hear him or anybody else making the claims that he is making in this video and in almost all the interviews that he gives, please feel free to use this video and the information that I link in the description to debunk the information yourself. Don't let these myths spread because they seriously are harmful and they're going to get people killed. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so that you can catch me next Tuesday where I'll be debunking some more funky stuff.